Well, welcome back to Voices of Change. And it's been a little while since I've had one of these online conversations. And what's so great for me is they're live, they're in the moment. And we hope that we're going to recreate that for you too, the listener. This is, after all, a digital reproduction. But hey, we're okay with that here at the ICSDP. And we are so okay with our next guest. James Schneider is here with us. He's the communications director for Progressive International. He's a writer. He's an advocate, and I was introduced to James through Adam Snade, who you've heard of before, and you can go back and listen to his interview that we did here. He was number one not so long ago, but James wrote the foreword, the wonderful foreword to Adam's book, Hidden Politics, and if you haven't picked that up yet, you should. So there you go. How's that? We're starting out in a prescriptive way. James, thanks so much for joining us. It really is great to meet you and great to have you here with us. I was going to say on the show, I do this thing called Face to Face, and it's more of a show. This is really it's not really a show, is it, James? It's more
of a conversation.
It's a conversation, and that's what we're all here for. So I just did want to say thank you in a big way.
Thanks for having me. It's hopefully we'll have a great time.
Yeah. So, James, you got to tell me about this international chess playing thing. I need to know a little bit more about that. Did that come before the step into politics, or did that come after? Because I think it's an interesting conversation there. There's a metaphor there, James.
No, it came afterwards. So quick backstory. I used to be an Africa-focused journalist, which is how I met Adam. I published some pieces by him mainly on cotton, which is his expertise. And then I accidentally fell into British politics. I came back from reporting on Boko Haram and I had sort of 2 weeks off work. Jeremy Corbyn was having a completely left field 200-1 chance run at being Labour leader. And I had met him before because he was the only MP in Britain who was interested in the civil war in the Central African Republic. And I met him at a couple of roundtables. So I thought, he's a decent guy. I'll go and volunteer on that campaign for 2 weeks. It won't go anywhere. And then I'll just go back to work and everything will be fine. And that's not what happened. And then I ended up sort of doing that for 5 years, doing comms and some strategy and speeches and organizing the grassroots movement to keep him in. Anyway, after that, then there was COVID, and first I joined the Progressive International. I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that. And the Progressive International is all over the world. There's no office. Our team is everywhere. We're always on Zoom. And so at some point in 2021, during COVID and during all that, I realized it's really expensive living in London, and it's not much fun in COVID, and I don't have to be anywhere for work. And so I decided to go to St. Vincent in the Eastern Caribbean, and I got a one-way ticket there. And then I stayed because it's the best place on earth, basically. It's absolutely wonderful. And when I was there, I don't know how much to go into it, but basically I joined their chess team. And we ended up getting into the Olympiad, which is the Chess World Cup. And so I represented St. Vincent in 2 Olympiads, one in India in 2022 and one in Budapest in 2024. We didn't do particularly well, but I did manage to win a small number of games, which for me was very good. I was very pleased with that.
So hang on a minute here. You don't just step into chess. I don't think you do anyway, but maybe you did.
No, I played chess as a child. My dad taught me to play chess, and nice. I played I played chess from being a kid, and my dad took me to Short versus Kasparov when that was in London in the early 90s. Maybe that was 93 or 94 or something like that. So I played as a kid, and I played until, those teenage years when you start wanting to, talk to girls and drink and smoke cigarettes. And at that point, I think I stopped playing chess and didn't really play very much until being locked inside in the pandemic and having nothing to do. So then I was taking it up again. And then I got to St. Vincent, and I didn't know anybody in St Vincent, but I knew someone from St Vincent who I used to play cricket with here in the UK, who used to spend half the year here, half the year in St Vincent. And he said, yeah, go up and, trying to find my house. There's no addresses. And the route, he said, he was like, go up by Vermont, then you just turn left and go up the hill and just go towards the bush bar, and then there'll be a bit of a clearing and there's a big mango tree, and you'll find it. And by the way, there's my friend who's living there who's a great Kurdish guy. He loves literature. He loves the novels of Yasha Kamal. You'll get on very well. He's very well read in philosophy and politics. Anyway, he'll probably be there. So anyway, I turn up at this house, and sure enough, there is this wonderful guy who I'm now great friends with, this Kurdish guy who happened to end up on this island, and he sort of brought me in, and he had a chessboard. So then we started playing. Wow. And then he was friends with the Nigerian doctor who had played in the Nigerian team before coming to St Vincent, like 8 years beforehand.
So are you unpacking your first screenplay? I love all the serendipitous thoughts. It's it's amazing.
Wonderful. Yeah. And then I ended up in the team, and the federation was only just sort of getting started up. We had this great weird team which continues, although obviously I'm not in the team now because I'm not there. But yeah, we got to go and compete in 2 Olympiads. I competed in the Bolivarian Games in Venezuela.
Oh. Well, you really are an international chess player. This isn't just a bio reference. It's pretty funny, James. I promise, folks, we're gonna step into the ICSDP momentarily. But I think some of this biographical stuff is not only fascinating, but I think it's kind of important. We step into these conversations, James, with people like yourself, and we're just, the assumption is, well, of course they're experts, or of course we should like them, or of course we should believe everything they say. And I always feel a little autobiography goes a long way, and it helps to break down some of those walls, especially when you've got this thing called the internet in between us. Yes. But anyway, I think, James, I think it's wonderful, and I mean, there's lots of we could have some fun with this. I'm sure the metaphors abound. Serious question. Do you think it's made you a better conversationalist? Can you handle yourself in an argument in a new way because of the chess playing that you've played, or has it actually gone the other way? And I hate to be so sort of polarized in that question, but I'd love to hear you unpack that a little bit about that. I was reading a New York Times piece recently about play and about how important play has become, or should become, for all of us. There's this wonderful book by James Carse called Infinite Games, and just unpacking this idea philosophically of how we don't play enough, and where does that situate us, ideologically, and so on and so forth. Anyway, lots buried there, yeah. But I'd love to know how chess has had an impact.
So I think it's maybe it helped me maintain my ability to concentrate.
Interesting.
Everything is ruining our ability to concentrate, to be able to read, to be able to focus, to so on. And in chess, you can't. So it's exhausting. I mean, when you're playing these long games, I mean, they're going on 3.5. They can be 4 hours long. That's mentally exhausting. You have to focus the entire time, because if you lose, it's your fault. By definition, right. by definition, if you lose, you made a mistake at some point. And so you really have to focus. And then in improving things, I wouldn't say necessarily in specific arguments, but there's one concept in chess which I find useful in organizational development, which is this concept of maintaining the tension. So I don't know if you play chess, but often you'll get pawns lined up facing each other that can potentially take each other, and the minor pieces are all maneuvered around to protect that position. And so when they're like that, you've got the tension there, it hasn't broken in any position. And you're always trying to maintain the tension while building up your structural position, so that when the tension breaks, and that's when things happen very fast, you'll end up at the end of the sequence of exchanges, or at the end of something happens, you'll end up in a marginally better position. And that's all that's good. And I think often in organization building and alliance building and so on, a lot of that is about maintaining the tension, which doesn't mean, you're trying to be antagonistic, and it doesn't mean that you're saying that these positions which are different can be ignored forever. But the point is, you don't want to break the tension yet.
I think it's wonderful, and I think it's brilliant. I mean, I think the art of a great conversation is being able to maintain or at least live with a certain kind of attention, especially if you disagree. And I continue to have this conversation with so many people, and not just my guests here for Voices of Change, but for Face to Face. And I've got several other projects I'm working on, because you often run up against that, right? So, and it's not just about chess pieces on a board. We're talking about lives. We're talking about millions of lives around the world. And so if we extend the metaphor here a little bit and play with it, sure. You've got a game that we're playing, I suppose. We have an economic disorder right now. How are we going to work our way through that strategically? And what people will say that, right?
Yeah.
We'll use, I've heard the phrase recently, 3-dimensional chess. Well, what does that even mean? Right. So we need to talk about that. We
also
need to unpack it.
One thing to just say, when people use the chess metaphors and 3-dimensional chess, they assume that what people who play chess are doing, and I'm not saying this as someone who's particularly good, but I mean really good players, they're not looking 6 moves into the future. It's not actually possible to be doing that effectively. Most of what's going on is engaging with principles, having a clear strategy that you're following, and then calculating on the basis of those things. That's actually how they work. So I think a lot of the metaphors people use about chess, they're sort of using a computer metaphor. They're not actually using how humans actually engage in strategy.
Right. Well, and I think we're back to maintaining the tension. Well, James, isn't there a deterministic sort of assumption there that there's a bigger plan at play here? Like, ooh, I'm way ahead of you on this, therefore, right? And I think when we use these types of analogies, we really do have to be careful. You can be called out as being the old fart in the room if you bring something like this up, but it really is important. You accept the analogy, you kind of have accepted the argument, it seems to me, and that's where it can be troubling, right?
Yeah, I mean, as a sort of tangent, but a kind of similar thought. I mean, we see this a lot when people are talking about, about Donald Trump, but talking about all sorts of things. People think that everyone is going into something with a well worked out strategy that lays out what 3 or 4 steps ahead are, when actually strategy is kind of an emergent way for the human mind to almost retroactively explain the things that were done in an improvisational way, or in a way which is based on assumptions. Assumptions plus improvisation gets written back to what the strategy was.
No, I love the idea of improvisation. I mean, that really applies. I mean, so here we are talking about this ICSDP, this independent commission on sustainable development progress. Lots of assumptions there, of course, that need to be unpacked and talked about. But let's talk about that tension there. You wrote the foreword to Hidden Politics for Adam Schneider, and co-founder of the commission, and so on. Can you talk a little bit about that, James, and how it relates to what we're talking about here? I mean, there's so many issues, right? There's so many different paths we can take on this conversation. Why does something like the ICSDP need to exist? Is it really going to be independent? Is this about challenging assumptions and so on and so forth?
Well, I mean, it has to be if it's going to function, and it also has to exist because the Sustainable Development Goals obviously aren't working. If you look around the world, I could bore you and our listeners by reading off a bunch of stats, but instead, go and buy Adam's book. There are loads of stats in there, but also in the forward, the little forward I wrote at the beginning, there we go. I lay out some of them, how we're going backwards. And I think, as Adam shows pretty well in the book, that's because these things are treated as a kind of technocratic exercise. That if only we could set forward the right goals, the system will adapt to achieve them. And that power is absent in that question. It's entirely absent in that question. And I think it confuses. I mean, in that forward, I lay out three different types of crisis trying to. I mean, this came about from sitting around thinking, everyone talks about crisis a lot. There's the poly crisis. There's, all of this stuff. What are we really talking about then? And how can we understand our desire for progress and advance and improving the lives of most people in an age where crisis seems baked in? So then I was trying to look at three different types. One is the crisis within the system, which is part of this is part of the reason the Sustainable Development Goals have struggled to reach themselves, is because some of the crises, like unemployment, poverty, the destruction of land and so on, are baked into the system which you're trying to train to solve those very same problems. And why I say they're crises within the system is the system functions perfectly fine on its own terms with them. In some cases, it needs them in order to carry on. Fundamental capital accumulation or control over resources or whatever don't mind if through that process more people end up going to bed hungry, or life expectancy stops rising for most countries, or these things that have been happening. Then the next category of crisis, which is the potentially more hopeful one, is crises of the system, which is each of those crises within the system, they generate a response. If workers are exploited, if land is stolen, if resources are stolen, if water is polluted, all of these things generate a response. And those responses can, if they come together sufficiently with enough force, with the right contingency, can then create crises of the system, i.e. of the fundamental logics of the system. And this type of thinking isn't baked into the Sustainable Development Goals at all. There's no concept of power, so there can be no concept of counterpower, which is again why none of the right forces are being mobilized in order to deliver on these goals. And if you look at a lot of these goals, similar ones have been achieved in different states at different times in history, with different sets of policies mobilizing different groups of people. If you want to massively increase agricultural yields, or you want to massively increase literacy, or you want to, whatever it might be, these things have all been done. And then there's a third and the most alarming category of crises, which is crises beneath the system, which are crises that are happening not at the logic of the ordinary running of the system, but underneath that. So, I mean, really here we're talking about climate breakdown. And when I was writing that forward, which I think was in February 2024, I think, it was currently 2 degrees warmer than pre-industrial average the previous month that they had record. Every single one of the previous 12 months have been 1.5 degrees warmer than pre-industrial average. The previous year had seen the North and the South Poles simultaneously 30 degrees above average temperature, etc., etc. The Holocene, this era, the system which we're critiquing and we're seeking to change also came about in a very specific geological period. And that's one we're coming out of. So we also have to be aware, as we're seeking to transform the power relations within the existing system, so things can really, can change in a sustainable way, so that you can actually have sustainable development. We also have to be aware that the very ground on which we rest is shifting. And, from in the 2 years since, I guess I wrote that, history's moving even faster. I mean, 2026 has started with quite the bang.
Yeah. Understatement of the century, right? So your involvement with ICSDP is driven by, well, you don't have a crystal ball, James, is my guess.
No.
Right? And wouldn't that be wonderful? Right. And I mean, I think that kind of relates back to that question, that chess sort of question as well, right? About how can you speculate, how can you project, and so on. Your involvement, would you say it's driven by hope? Because I think as I was listening to you sort of unpack some of those power dynamics, I was wondering about that, talking about tension, the tension between the cynicism and hope, of I often ask people, in this sort of, the sector, how do you get out of bed in the morning? You're working on landmine clearance around the world, and yet countries are stepping away from the Ottawa Treaty. How do you get out of bed in the morning and still maintain that sense of hope and not fall into this spiral of cynicism? I guess that's the question I'm asking you in a sense. And is that what's sort of driving you forward to say the world does need an independent commission is there to reinvent the SDG framework that's apolitical as best as it can be, etc. Anyway, again, couple layered questions there.
I think sometimes it's fine to not get out of bed.
Fair enough.
No, yes. I'm not saying always, but if the only thing that drives us is hope, we're going to be frequently disappointed. And I thought about this somewhat, myself. I think what drives me and means that I, generally speaking, do get out of bed and generally speaking do work on things while maintaining, hopefully, as much as you can, a kind of clear-eyed assessment of where things are and what is and isn't likely to work, is just think that all human beings have dignity. And it's offensive that we live in a world in which that is not realized. It's that gap, the gap between what appears to me self-evident and unifying. I think even somewhere in their being, because they're part of the collective conscious, psychopaths, sociopaths, CEOs of big companies, the members of the Jeffrey Epstein Black Book, somewhere even in them, there is this nagging feeling that humans are have some, in some sense, have equal dignity or should have equal dignity. And so for me, it's not always I feel really good about things and therefore I'm going to do something. Sometimes it's this gap has got so wide that I can't, I won't be able to go to sleep if I don't do a thing. Like let's take a month ago. I'd had a really lovely break. Was quite tired by the end of last year and wanted a break. Had a very nice break over the kind of New Year period. And Saturday morning, 3rd of January, I'm thinking I'm going to have another weekend before I'm even going to open my computer. And the US has bombed Caracas and kidnapped the president. And then the next night, that night, couldn't sleep until I did something. It's just like, there's sometimes it's not hope that drives you, it's the gap. And sometimes it is the hope. Sometimes it's the hope that the gap can shrink. And sometimes it's the horror at the widening gap that I think makes you do something. And that means that each of those states, all of those states that we are in, are not ones to be rejected or ashamed of. They all provide information. If you are too angry to do something or too angry not to do something, if you're too miserable to do something or too miserable not to do something, if you're so ecstatic that you absolutely will do things, if you're so ecstatic that you're worried that you might do something that's not right, all of these things are giving us information about where we are in the whatever you want, in the social world, in the universe at that particular moment. So yeah, I experience hope sometimes, and sometimes that's really wonderful, but often not at all. And that's also not a demotivating or necessarily miserating.
Yeah, it's interesting that I love that you started by saying sometimes it's just okay not to get out of bed, and perhaps that's just rest, and maybe that's just stepping back, maybe it's meditation. There's so many different ways you can look at that, but I think it's super healthy, and I certainly don't do it enough, James. I really don't. I feel like, it's pretty funny. My sleeves are usually rolled up, in the real world, but I just feel like they're always rolled up. And I've really relate to what you said about you couldn't sleep until you did something. And I wonder about that. And I love this about the commission, the ICSDP. By the way, folks, it's the ICSDP.org. If you want to find out a little bit more about it, who's involved, you can find out. There's about 5 interviews there. You can sign up for a newsletter and find out more about where we're heading over the next little while, or at least we're going to maintain some hope over here that we're going to get there. But I love what I hear, I think, anyway, James, help me out here, but theory practice. How is it that you didn't get stuck in a theoretical world? Because I think, I heard you talk a little bit about ecstasy and being ecstatic and it almost hypnotizing you in a sense. And I think that really happens a lot. I've worked in development for years and people will say, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to get involved. So therefore, I'm not going to do much of anything. Isn't it horrible what's happening in the world? Well, that's not where we want folks to be, is it? I don't think so. But it's tough. It's really tough. And I think the ICSDP is about this, trying to build that bridge between theory and practice, it seems to me.
Yeah, I really relate to that as well. I when I was a Africa-focused journalist and found everything fascinating, and I was learning a huge amount, and everything I was working on, some of it was fantastic, some of it was horrible, but it was endlessly fascinating. But after a while, I came to think I do feel like I need to be part of something, and I was scratching the itch before, and then the itch stopped being scratched by it. Basically, it's like, oh, I'm doing enough now. I'm learning enough. What I'm doing, I feel is useful enough. And then I, tried to get involved in a couple of things in the UK on the basis that there's this really nice Michael Hart, there's a philosopher, political theorist Michael Hart story that sticks with me, which is in the 80s. He was supporting the Sandinistas, and he was going around universities in the US and getting old computers and things that they didn't need and bringing them down to the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, and was there thinking he was doing a really good thing and helping out. And then one of the guys there one day said to him, like, Michael, why are you here? And he's like, oh, because I want to help, and I want to play my part in the Sandinista revolution, and I think what you're doing is amazing, etc., etc. And he's like, yeah, but do you know what would be really helpful? It's like, what? Tell me. Should I get more computers? What shall I do? He's like, can you not just make revolution in the US? And Michael laughs. He's like, ha, yeah, very funny. He was like, then he looked at him like dead in the eyes. He's like, what? Don't you have mountains you can go to? And obviously that didn't make me think I want to retreat to the hills and train for armed insurrection in the UK. I definitely didn't think that, in case the state's watching. That's not what I was planning on doing. But being involved in something, and then accidentally fell into a political project and experienced for 4 or 5 years. Mainly it was the day-to-day of it was mainly extremely unpleasant.
Mm.
But experience that hope and that real high of the possibility of being part of something that can change things, and having the immediacy. That's also part of it. I mean, history is cruel in that you said earlier, we have no crystal ball. We've really got no idea, or we've got very little idea. Like, the thing that we do now actually in 20 years' time will have been really significant or totally irrelevant. There are all of these things are like this. But when you are in the moment of some kind of political project, you can see quite quickly the things that you're doing having some impact in the world, and that is somewhat hypnotic. So I've moved, I guess, between backwards and forwards between theory and practice, and I think that's really necessary. I mean, I think it's really necessary to not get stuck in what you think. I think it's extremely necessary to be grounded in some way. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm the most grounded in popular movements person in the world, but to have some grounding in popular movements on whom theoretically you think that the world will be remade by. So I think that's incredibly important. And there are a million ways to do it. I mean, there's no one
Right.
presumptive way at all. And some people get it by combining extremely different types of activity. But I think that is really important. And I think probably that's what could be an important part of this project, and was clearly a thing that was missing from the initial SDG project itself, was that it doesn't have you can put this in, the point I'm about to make, you can either put in a kind of tech bro way, or you can put in a Maoist way, but it's the same point, right? Which is iterative. You have a theory, you bring it into the world, you see what actual people actually do with it, and then you go back and refine it, and then you bring it back, and so on and so forth. And in tech stuff, that's called iteration, and in Maoism, that's called the mass line. But it's the similar. It's
dialectics.
Yeah, and how else do you actually gain concrete understanding about reality? Reality doesn't exist in our heads. That what exists in our heads is a kind of thinner version of it that helps us to understand enough so that we can act. That's not to slag off thinking. Thinking's fantastic. Without thinking, you can't come up with understandings of the world upon which you can act. But they're always reduced. They're always imperfect. They're always missing. They're always missing a lot of things. And also, oftentimes, particularly people that view themselves as more intellectual, tend to not think about what actually moves people.
James, it's unbelievable how much time has passed already and how quickly this very short introduction has gone here for the two of us, to you and to the work you do and to the ICSDP as well. Do you have to listen well to play chess? I was just, while you were chatting again, I feel like, wow, we're living in is the right way to put this, a discompassionate world? Where's the compassion for others, and where is the bridge? It seems like we're swimming in division and polarization and so on. And anyway, and I just thought, to play the game of chess, to strategize, is it about being open to your opponent in some way, just to kind of extend this metaphor? And we don't have to stretch it. If it's not there, it's not there. I get that. But I guess what I'm hoping is we're going to land on, it's not about just all getting along, but it is about worldview and perspective, right?
So, in chess, you have to pay great attention to your opponent, because your opponent, you can have the best laid plans. Your opponent gets to move as well. You get one move, your opponent gets one move.
It's good.
And I suppose often when people are thinking about strategy and planning, they tend to forget that other people have votes and a say and agency, and that what they do greatly impacts what you're doing. And if you're just pursuing a line that doesn't take into account what they're doing, you can do totally stupid things, which if they'd done something else, it would have been very clever or perfectly good. But on this compassion thing, I think the world is absolutely brimming with compassion. I think compassion is everywhere. I think compassion is probably the default position. I think it is the default position. We have a system that has to commit so much symbolic and real violence against people's natural compassion in order to maintain itself, because it's so weird. I'll give you, I said I wasn't going to give loads of stats at the beginning. I'll give one stat, which is from the 2026 World Inequality Report, which just came out, which is that 60,000 people, which is 0.0001% of the global population, or less than, more wealth, have 3 times more wealth than the bottom 4 billion people on Earth, than the bottom half of humanity. Which, I'm not saying because that's mathematically remarkable or anything else like that, but it's like a huge proportion of the world's wealth is in the hands of a rounding error.
Mm.
And that's really weird. And in order to maintain that, to keep that going, you have to do a huge amount of symbolic and physical violence to maintain that, which is where we are then presented with, we live in this horrible world that lacks compassion. You can take, when you look at if you look at the most warlike state on earth that commits the most violence on earth by some distance, and then you look at polling of its citizens, who you would think, well, the government is doing all of this stuff, including against its own citizens, and so I'm talking about the US, of course. But you look at the polling, majorities don't want this stuff. This is despite being told it's in your interests, despite the information space, which is predominantly owned by, psycho tech billionaires. If you're, and then if you're lucky, just your common or garden traditional media billionaire pumping out stuff which is not designed to appeal to and enhance, bring out our best sides of ourselves, our best ability to understand that Chomsky's idea was manufacturing consent. Sure, there's manufacturing consent, but there's also manufacturing disquiet and fear and anxiety in such a large degree, things which make people emotionally less capacious, emotionally less open, emotionally less able to do things. But I think if we want to deal with that, you've got to deal with it from both ends. We can deal with it from the human end, from below, in building more human, more compassionate, more dignified social relations ourselves where we can, and from above by doing things like changing the tax system and not burning more fossil fuels and taxing billionaires and democratizing the media and giving everybody healthcare and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All things which make the world a more civilized place where we can be our natural and better selves. That's not to say that there's one type of human. That's not to say that everybody will be like that. There's a vast diversity in the ways in which people can express their, how they're compassionate or whatever. But what we have now is not serving our best natures, which is in some ways denaturing humanity as a whole.
I love, we got to wrap shortly here, James, and it's clearly part 2 and part 3 are coming up, folks. So stay tuned. But I love, James, that you sort of presuppose the care and the concern and the compassion. How's that for alliteration? That all that's already there. I love that. But that the structure, the consent, the manufactured consent won't allow us to maybe access that in significant, sustainable human ways. And I think that's really interesting, but I think it's really beautiful as well. James, please tell me a little bit more about your work at Progressive if you'd like, but would you say too that, that's part of the reason why you're involved with the ICSDP, that there is hope, that it is out there, that we need to reframe this in some way, shape, or form?
So the Progressive International is a global network of progressive political parties, trade unions, social movements, peasants' unions, national liberation organizations, campaigns all over the world, mainly in the global south, but also some in the north as well. And our aim is to unite, organize, and mobilize the world's progressive forces. Basically, get as much of the good guys on the same field, kicking the ball in the same direction at the same time. Our opponents are, of course, we know they have more money and, more arms and more power or whatever, but they're also well networked and well coordinated and often better than we are. And it is through one of our projects that Adam and I started talking about this, and he got me to write the foreword for his book, and then was knocking about the idea, which is
love that phrase, by the way.
Knocking about the idea.
Yeah. Very academic. Yeah. It's awesome.
Which is 50 years ago, or now 2 years ago, the nations of the South managed to pass a new international economic order through the UN institutions. And obviously, that's not what we ended up with. We ended up with instead a global counter-revolution against national sovereignty in the South and organized working class power in the global North. But the ideas within it, or a lot of the ideas within it, are extremely interesting. And it also reflects this almost high point of history before this counter-revolution, where you had decolonized states were pursuing sovereign development, or many of them were pursuing sovereign development, where workers' movements in the North were winning great things for those, of course, incomplete and imperfect in all of their ways. So with Progressive International, we had a kind of 2-year process leading up to the 50-year anniversary of the new international economic order, trying to revive it for the present, not in the same form, but engaging with thinkers, governments that were doing interesting things and coming up with a common program of action to build a multilateralism from below, which didn't say we can just pass some General Assembly statement and something will happen, because we know that didn't work from below. That didn't work before. We're going to have to build it up from below. And I think the ICSDP project has a similar idea, which is the international system is hugely imperfect and we are critical of it. But we don't want it to disappear. We want to build a new version of it from below, which does both things, which both reforms what's currently there along more progressive lines, while building the power from below that would either make that reform really meaningful or that could replace it. And I think that is a huge and enormous project for us in this century. And it's become ever more urgent in the last month. But before that, with the changes that are going on within US imperialism and within the Trump administration, openly trying to destroy the international order, which, again, far from perfect, but contains seeds of things which are good, and also freezes in aspect, or did freeze an aspect. Now, I don't know if aspect can melt, but, the aspect's melting somewhat. But, 2 high watermarks, I think, in human civilization. One was essentially a liberal one, but one shaped from the reality of 2 world wars, the horror of 2 world wars. And if you look at those, the UN Charter, the Genocide Convention, all of those things that they brought forward then, there was a clear and earnest attempt to prevent those grotesque horrors. And when you read about the 2 wars and try to imagine destruction and horror and death on such a scale, I mean, it's utterly scarring for human civilization. And the desire to prevent that was one high watermark, and the other is decolonization. And so you see in international law a number of things. Once these post-colonial states were entering the world stage and therefore able to, or more able to, shape international law, and you see that, and then there's the counter-revolution against it. So, and this is all a roundabout way to say, we don't know what form these things are precisely going to take, but it's worth simultaneously taking seriously the things that are already there without pretending that they have all of the answers. And by taking them seriously, you're able to propose what the alternative is. I'll give you one more example. Sorry, I know we've run way over time, but from the work of the Progressive International. So during the genocide in Gaza, we were, like everybody, horrified by the fact that, of course, there was the genocide that was going on. There was great complicity stretching right around the world, and international law was being trashed. And there didn't seem to be the appropriate response from states that are signed up to clear international law and clear mechanisms for accountability. It's all already there. So by taking those things seriously, we convened states that were taking action, states like Malaysia, South Africa, Colombia, and so on, to form the Hague Group of States that's taking international law seriously, that says we are actually going to live up to our commitments. Living up to our commitments means we don't just say things, we take concrete measures, because if you read the Genocide Convention, if it's plausible a genocide's going on, that puts legal responsibilities upon states to prevent them being complicit with that going on. There's a whole body of international law about states' obligations in the case of human rights abuses, and also companies' obligations in the case of human rights abuses. So we thought the best way to be critical of this system, which is totally failing, is what if you take this seriously and you show this is what taking it seriously looks like, which itself is the critique, which itself is the alternative, which is the challenge from below, but is built on this shared territory, which says, you've all signed up to this. You've all signed up to this system. Okay, the US says that they haven't. But if you take there's a September 2024 UN General Assembly resolution, which follows on from the International Court of Justice ruling in July 2024 on Israel's occupation of Palestine. And huge number of states, 124 states, I think, sign it. And it's a very serious document that lays out in quite stringent terms what are the legal responsibilities of states to no longer support in any way what is an illegal situation in occupied Palestine. And most sign and then aren't taking the actions. So I think sometimes taking things seriously with your eyes open can be the best form of critique.
Yeah, you've given me so many great phrases that we could use as a title for taking things seriously with your eyes open, clear and earnest attempt, the high possibility of hope. How's that? The high of possibility was the phrase. I love that phrase. I hate to cut you off. I feel like we've barely got out of the gate, James. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
We can talk again.
I look forward to that. So Progressive International, just punch it up online.
Yeah,
you'll find out.
Progressive.international. It's an extremely good domain name.
Yeah, there you go. Nice one. So, and the ICSDP.org, you'll be able to find this very soon. James, thanks so much for joining us here on Voices of Change. This podcast, this conversation, it's ongoing, and we'll look forward to.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me. Talk soon, I hope.